Welcome back everyone to part 2 of the Building a King-Size Platform Bed series. In part 1, if you haven't watched it, you can scroll down to the bottom of the YouTube window and click on the video or the channel icon, or you can go to the end of the video and I'll post a link there. So in the first part I built the base, which consisted of 2 rails and 4 legs. And now I need to build the platform that's going to go on top of the rails and support the mattress. And that's the difference between a platform bed and a regular bed. Is that with a regular bed you have a headboard, a footboard, 2 side rails, and then a box spring that's normally 11 or 12 inches tall that sits on top of the side rails and supports the mattress on top of that. With a platform bed, you build a platform that has either slats or sometimes people use plywood, and then the mattress sits directly on that. You get some advantages building it that way because you free up a lot of space underneath when you remove the box spring. Largely I'm doing the platform bed style because that's what my wife told me I was going to do. So some of the features of this design that I think make it a little bit better than some of the other ones that I've seen is that it's not built as one massive solid bed that's going to be impossible to move around. I wanted to make sure that this was something that I could build in pieces in the garage, take into the house, assemble by myself, and if I ever have to move furniture around or move to a different house, it's going to be pretty easy to take everything apart and put it back together without having to get an entire crew of movers to pick the thing up and figure out how to fit it through a doorway. One of the other requirements is that she has a habit of stubbing her toes on the corner of the bed in the middle of the night and then waking me up with screaming and profanities. So by getting rid of the corners on the floor and moving the platform up a little bit higher, now I only have to worry about her shins. One of the other requirements that she gave me was that she wanted to have it she said she wanted it to be my style, meaning that normally when I build stuff, I'll use some different styles of wood or different types of wood, glue them together, and come up with some kind of a decorative design. That's not going to be in this video. That's going to be for the next one when I put the decorative border around the platform. And also I wanted this thing to be adaptable, so I could take it apart, put it back together, change pieces. If I ever want to build a different base, different style, I could do that and just attach it to the existing platform. If I ever wanted to build some or use a different wood design around the edges, I could take off the decorative wood pieces and put on something else, use that wood for another project. So anyway, let's get started. The first thing we got to do is find the right wood and start planing it down. I decided to go with spruce for the platform, and that's because spruce is a relatively light wood that is also very strong. That's why it's used for framing members. My main concern was moisture content. So I went through each one of these boards with a moisture meter to check. Some of them were a little bit higher moisture content than I wanted. So I'm going to be careful to use those in areas where they're not going to flex as much. And I'll use the drier ones that are pretty straight grained for the outside to make sure that that portion stays straight. Also last night I turned on my dehumidifier and my fan just to try to take the content on the surface at least down a little bit more. And now I'm going to run them through the joiner to get everything flat and straight. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this portion just because if you have the equipment, you know how to do it. If you don't have the equipment, it's really an optional step. You can just pick out really nice straight boards at the hardware store. Just try to pick out ones that are dry or give them a little bit more time to dry out after you get it back to your house. The next step is to start cutting everything to length. Some of the more relevant dimensions are shown in this picture if you want to pause and copy anything down. I'm using a stop block on the miter saw to make sure that the pieces are consistent lengths, and that'll make the assembly a little bit easier later. I marked the end pieces using approximately 13-inch centers, and then I'm transferring the measurements to the other boards using a square. 13-inch center is approximate. It doesn't have to be exactly that. It just has to be something consistent and something that makes sense. Pre-drilling your screw holes is a very good idea because it'll avoid splits and cracks, and rather than measuring and marking a whole bunch of pieces individually, I'm just using this guide block. and also a slight countersink so all the screw heads sit flush with the surface. Once enough of the holes are drilled and countersunk, it's time to start assembly, using glue and 3-inch screws to hold everything together. My garage floor isn't perfectly flat, so I put those 4 blocks in the corner to hold everything off the ground and avoid the curvature of the garage floor. I know that my boards are perfectly straight and that all of my cuts were at 90 degrees, and as long as everything was at the same length, this thing should pull itself square when I cinch everything down. If your boards are all cut to a consistent length and your diagonal measurements are identical, then you have a square frame. If not, you have to make some adjustments. Rather than trying to rely on a tape measure, I just cut a block to the right length and I'm using that as a spacer for each end. And so on and so forth until the whole thing is completed. Come on. It is 91 and a hair over 5/8. And come on. Right in the middle. 91 and a hair over 5/8, and that is dead on. Excellent. And again, one of the reasons that I chose spruce 2x4s for the platform is that when they're dried out, they're relatively light. But are they strong enough to support a 225-pound fat boy who loves to eat ice cream? Okay, but what about a 225-pound fat boy who loves to eat ice cream and his 90-pound wife who loves to eat salad and didn't have time to put on her makeup before I made her come out to the garage and jump on my back? Looks good. And if you're wondering how I pulled that off without falling over, it's because she's actually been on my back about making this bed for the past 6 months or so I've had some practice. As an optional but recommended step, I'm taking off the sharp edge from both platform components using a 1/8 roundover bit. If you didn't plane the boards down to begin with, you probably won't have to do this since 2x4s normally come with a slightly rounded edge. I cut up these 4 pieces of ash at 3 inches wide, 3/4 inch thick, and 40 inches long, and they're going to be used to attach the cross beam to the platform. And I want to have these set in so that they're flush with the surface of the 2x4s. So to do that, I put together this simple jig using some scrap 2x4s and ash, and that's going to fit right on the end here. And I have it cut so that the center lines up on 12 inches. And that's easier than measuring each one of these carefully, because no matter how carefully you measure, things will be a little bit off. I don't want to have to worry about that, so I use this jig, move it down the line, and then I'll use my router with a flush trim bit to follow the inside of this template, and everything should be the exact same length. And the idea is that if I ever take this thing apart and put it back together, I don't want to have to worry about having it facing the right way, or this is the left side or the right side. I want all the mounting holes and everything to be exactly the same all the way around. And now just repeat the process on both ends of both platform panels. Apply glue to all of the cutouts and then start clamping the boards in place. And once the glue is dry, I grabbed my oldest can of polyurethane that was starting to gel over a little bit and just wiped on a single coat over the whole thing. And that was just to seal the wood on the surface a little bit and bond those wood fibers together so that I could give it a nice sanding later and make everything smooth. I used my combination square to mark the exact center of each board and then measured in 7 inches from each end before drilling the hole using a 1/2 inch Forstner bit with a piece of plywood on the back to avoid tear out. I'm going to use a 3/8 inch bolt to attach this, but I'm drilling a 1/2 inch hole just to allow a little bit of play because wood is always going to move a little bit. I also need to drill some holes around the perimeter for connecting everything, but because I didn't have all of my measurements figured out in the beginning, I'm doing it after the fact. Would have been easier with the drill press, but this works just as well. I just set up a jig with a couple holes drilled in it at the correct measurements, and all I have to do is move it around the platform piece and drill the holes. And as long as I have that drill guide handy, I can use it to mark the support rails at the same time, measuring this time from the center of the rail towards the outside. I'm using the same 1/2 inch drill bit just to make a mark about where the holes are going to go, but then I'm going to switch to a smaller bit later to accommodate the bolts. I don't want to take any chances with these bolts going in crooked, so I'm switching over to the drill press using a vertical fence to drill these holes. I marked each one of these hanger bolts with the line for my depth, and the easiest way to install these is to use 2 nuts. And when you have 2 of them on there, that prevents it from spinning while you're using an impact wrench or a regular wrench or whatever to drive it. By this point, it was really starting to feel like I should be just about finished with this project, but no. I decided to build the slats for the top of the platform out of some poplar that I cut the year before. Poplar is a very lightweight wood, although not as strong as spruce, but because it doesn't have to be strong for the top of the platform, I think it'll work out just fine. If you don't happen to have a giant stack of poplar just lying around, you could also just go to the hardware store and buy a bunch of 1x3s, but that was going to cost like $50 and woodworkers are cheap, so instead I decided to spend the entire weekend and probably use like 1.21 gigawatts of electricity cross-cutting, ripping on the bandsaw, joining, resawing, planing, final ripping on the table saw, rounding over the edges on the router, final cutting to length, sanding, and wiping on a coat of polyurethane. I also countersunk and pre-drilled all of the holes using the drill press and a stop block. I played around with several different layout configurations and finally settled on using a 2-inch wide level as the spacer. This worked out pretty well. I ended up with a couple boards that were a little bit unevenly spaced in the middle, a little bit closer than some of the others, but that really doesn't matter. The only reason the slats are there are to allow some airflow underneath the mattress, and that's one of the reasons why you don't want to use plywood in most cases, even though plywood is a lot easier to install. The third slat from each end is only temporarily attached at this point. I'm going to find a better way to attach that because that's exactly where the mounting bolts are going to be underneath. And with that piece of wood there, it'll be kind of hard to reach under and tighten down the wing nuts that are going to hold the platform to the base. To solve that problem, it's back to the drill press to put a 3/8 inch hole exactly where that screw would have been. With all the holes drilled, I just had to put that slat back where it originally was and continue drilling the same size hole down into the bottom of the platform. Then I can bonk in a dowel and reattach the slat. Alright, well now that the platform is built, all I gotta do is put this thing together, and I think I should be able to do this by myself since it's built in these modular components. I have a stack of washers, lock washers, and wing nuts that I'll use to attach the platform onto the rails. And I'm just going to film this in normal speed just to see how long it takes to put it together. so now it gets one flat washer, one lock washer, and a wing nut. And then once that's on, then this piece can go back into place. It just slides right onto the dowel. All right, that's the last one. So now we have some nice ash on oak contact, hardwood to hardwood, and that is plenty solid. So now we just need a mattress, which I happen to have. Oh man, this is worse than putting the bed together. Should do it. So, mattress is on the platform, and now next time, I'm going to see about building the decorative wood pieces that are going to wrap around the edge here and cover all the construction grade lumber. Otherwise, I think I'm off the hook for a little while. So, hope you enjoyed it, and hope you had fun building your own. Thanks for watching.